Somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, I see you on these WWE documentaries. How do I get a gig like that?" I go, "All you have to do is do exactly as I did." You guys like, what's that? I go, "First, time travel back to 1979 and make friends with Vince McMahon Sr. That's step one."
Hey, this a fall count, clap in time. Steve Thaw, live on the front line. Every slam, every secret revealed. Hit play, ring the bell, feel the feel, let's go. This a fall count, clap, 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 clap.
From the WWF Magazine to books that fans really enjoy, it's Keith Elliot Greenberg. How you doing today?
Great, Steve, and it's good to see you, even if it's via Zoom.
Yes, we have bumped into each other many times at
Not only have we
AEW
bumped
WWE
into,
press conferences.
I think we've even been roasted by the same internet trolls.
Yes, we have 100%. And, the press conferences aren't really highlighted anymore for the WWE and AEW. They've been careful about saying controversial things lately. But how does that feel, though, when you're out there and you ask a question and you think it's a good one, and then suddenly everyone decides to crap on you on Twitter?
You know what? You and I are there, and the people who are bashing us on Twitter are not. So I think it's just a symptom of them feeling resentful and insecure.
Wow. I like that answer a lot because I asked about Taylor Swift at one of these events, and boy, I was getting death threats over asking about Taylor Swift.
I remember at one point you went up and you were clowning with John Cena, and John Cena was enjoying himself, and you got criticized for that.
Yes, he asked me to touch his hand.
He's right.
He asked me.
Right.
So suddenly it wasn't John Cena's fault that he asked me to go up there. But
you know what? That's what I'm talking about. No one's asking those people to. John Cena's not inviting them, come up and touch my hand. So that's where a lot of that emanates from.
Yeah, it's a very interesting world to live in professional wrestling. Yeah. And it's funny because when I first met you, I think at an AEW press conference maybe, or we're walking around the Nassau Coliseum, I was like, oh, hey, it's good to see you again. And then we started talking more and more, and I was like, he wrote for the WWF magazine? Like that, my mind was blown that day. Like, how does someone end up working for a magazine publication like that?
Well, I was after the WrestleMania in Los Angeles. Somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, I see you on these WWE documentaries. How do I get a gig like that?" I go, "All you have to do is do exactly as I did." You guys like, what's that? I go, "First, time travel back to 1979 and make friends with Vince McMahon Sr. That's step one." So I've been hanging around for a long time. I've been a fan my entire life. And, I've been a professional writer since I've been 19. So when I realized I was going to make a living from doing this stuff, of course, I wanted to write about wrestling. And I was young, and I wasn't afraid of rejection, and I just badgered people until they agreed. And I was lucky because this was just prior to the Hulk Hogan era.
Okay.
A few years before the Hulk Hogan era. And it was during the Bob Backlund era. And professional wrestling did not receive a lot of national publicity. So when I would write an article, it would, people in the wrestling industry noticed it because they weren't used to so-called legit publications paying attention.
Of course.
And then I was at WrestleMania 1 speaking to the editor of the WWF Magazine at the time, Ed Raschuti, who I'm still friends with. He's probably about 87 or 88 years old now. He's a martial artist. He still does martial arts. He still writes. He's still as vibrant as he ever was. He still has the same sense of humor, still the same curiosity. And, we were chatting. He had been a boxer when he was at Notre Dame. And so he knew combat sports. He was learning the wrestling world and was learning it very quickly and very adeptly. But he was asking me some questions. And he said, and again, this is 1985. I don't really meet a lot of people with wrestling writing experience who are, as well rounded as you are, really work as professional writers. He goes, "How would you like to start writing for us?" And I'm like, "Okay." That one question changed my life. So thank you, Ed Raschuti. I've thanked him, dozens of times, and I'll thank him again right now.
Wow. That's amazing to hear. So when you start writing for the magazine, what is the direction you're given? Because are you blindly writing articles based on what you think the reader would be interested in, or there's a producer and editor and things like that?
Well, you couldn't quite, like, for instance, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I believe it existed at that point. If it didn't, it was coming into existence. But Inside Wrestling and The Wrestler existed. And, they had a pretty good staff of writers there, and they were very creative, and they could speculate. I mean, Bill Apter later told me, there was a price to pay if they speculated in a way that, aggravated the promoters.
Mm-hmm.
The promoters wouldn't be happy, but many promoters were just happy to have those magazines covering them.
Of course.
And so they could speculate, well, Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch were teaming together in Atlanta, but, they have a very torturous history where they've been best of friends and mortal enemies. And, when will the falling out take place? We couldn't do that at the WWF magazine.
Okay.
Because there were specific storylines in place. And so we couldn't talk about allies being enemies. For instance, we couldn't say Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant just wrestled each other in Japan 6 months ago.
Of course.
And so we were given, I would usually get that from Ed Raschuti early on, a certain direction. And sometimes I would be told, this is what we're leading towards. There's going to be, a series of matches, a program between these particular wrestlers. It's not in stone yet, but let's very subtly hint that there might be tension here. That's, the party line that we've been authorized to push. And, for a period, was weird. At first, I would get quotes from talent and realize this is the early WrestleMania era, and they didn't really know how the business was turning.
Of course.
So sometimes they would say things that the company didn't want them to say yet. And I actually remember having a conversation with Linda McMahon because it was small. I was not a staffer. I was a freelancer. And she said, sometimes you have to protect these guys from themselves. Sometimes, particularly if someone's playing heel, they're going to be a little outlandish. And we're marketing to kids. It was ravishing. Rick Rude told me, "Oh, I could have ended up as a hitman." And she's like, "That's a criminal. That's someone who kills people for a living."
Yeah, don't put that in there.
We shouldn't be. So there was a period where we were making up a lot of the quotes, but I always enjoyed talking to the talent because the talent was, you're playing the character. Where do you want your character to go? How are you infusing your personality into the character? And, in time, by the time Barry Werner came on, I guess just prior to the Attitude Era, and, Barry Werner had been the sports editor of the New York Daily News. Again, similar to Ed Raschuti, like somebody who was a real professional writer and journalist. So he always wanted there to be a journalistic element too, even when we were fictionalizing things. So he was encouraging people to get quotes and to work with the talent. So we kind of circled back to that. Vince Russo and I believe under Vince Russo, I also would speak to the talent because Vince Russo and I would discuss how does the talent feel about this role they've been given. Vince Russo, as is well known, did not get along with Jim Cornette.
Yes.
But I respected Jim Cornette quite a bit and still do. And so Russo would have me talk to Cornette and would actually have me talk to Cornette about things he didn't like about Vince Russo, and Vince Russo would let me write about it in the magazine. So it was pretty exciting. The 22 years that I was on retainer for those guys, I saw a lot of incarnations of the WWF, and I was growing along with them as a writer. And in the meantime, working on a lot of non-wrestling projects. And I feel it made me a better journalist in terms of just being able to deal with different personalities and be flexible as things changed quickly.
Of course. Now, in those articles that you're writing, though, a lot of them, like I have a whole set of the magazines over there, all safe. My wife wants me to throw them away. I'm like, no, don't you touch those.
I know.
Touch those, honey.
I was always hoping that my kids would want the magazines. My oldest is 29 now, so I don't think that, Dylan hasn't asked for the magazine. So
maybe someday, but
maybe when I'm no longer here, although I intend to be here a long time. So,
same.
Yeah.
That's so funny. But with the magazines, though, because clearly in some of the articles, these are storylines that don't exist on television. They exist on the house show circuit. So like, are you being told, hey, flat out, we need you to write an article about Barbarian versus Tito Santana because that is a house show. That's not on TV.
Right. But it's at lots of house shows. The term was, you're using Barbarian and Tito Santana as examples. I don't remember if that
no, I'm just using them as an example. Yeah.
But they would use the term. They'd go, Barbarian is married to Tito. They're going on that. They're married to each other. They're wrestling each other every night all over the world. And so that was a crucial thing because you had to get people engaged when they were at the house shows, and it went beyond the storylines on TV.
Okay. Now with house shows then too, you have like, at least the WWF is running 3 different towns in one day. In today's world, you get maybe, a dozen house shows in a year because of just the TV deals. Do you think that helps or hurt talent when you're out there every day wrestling away from your family, but now you don't get many reps, but you're home with your family?
You kind of answered the question. You answered the question. You need the reps, obviously, but your personal life does suffer for it.
Yes,
and that's not good. And a lot of wrestlers, have told me that, they were sad about frictions that took place in their families because they were away so often. And yet, when you're grinding it so hard, it's very easy to get injured. Here, I'm sitting today on a non-wrestling story. I'm sitting in Cleveland, Ohio. Then when we're done with this, I'll shower and I'll go to Canton, Ohio. Then I'll, at some point, drive down to Columbus, Ohio. And, you're like living road life. And, I think maybe the wrestling business helped prepare me for that too, where I'm running around to different cities. But, you're wrestling, say, in a place like Columbus, Ohio, and you get injured. The next day you're in, I don't know, let's say Cincinnati. And now the injury hasn't healed. It's getting worse. And I do think it takes quite a toll on your health. There was not the type of medical care, the health protocols that exist today. A lot of it was random. And I have a very vivid memory. I mean, 2 of the 3 parties that I'm going to mention are no longer alive, but I remember, Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels had their famous ladder match in Madison Square Garden at WrestleMania 10. And, going to the arena, it might have been Monday night. It might have been another night. It was within 48 hours. And talking to Razor Ramon about the pain he was in and how banged up he was. And Nikolai Volkov came over and he was recommending some stretching exercises to Razor Ramon. And they seemed to help, at least temporarily. He wasn't giving him handfuls of drugs, which was good. And but Now there'd be a trainer. He'd be on a training. He'd be iced up. He'd be on a training table the moment he came backstage. You know, the injuries, the aches and pains that probably contributed to his drug addiction later on. You know, that was, that there are now protocols in place to avoid this. And if somebody is too banged up, they're urged to rest. People aren't going to the ring concussed from the night before. They're checking to see if you're concussed, and if you're concussed, you can't get into the ring. I mean, you're hearing about this all the time. You're hearing about people getting injured, and suddenly, plans change for a major PLE or pay-per-view.
Yeah, it's unfortunate though that wrestlers, like, now you're seeing all these stories of wrestlers randomly being like, yeah, I wish there were more house shows, because I would bring my kids to a house show and they're like chasing each other around and like slapping their asses and tripping and falling over. You go to a Raw or a SmackDown or AEW Collision, whatever, a lot of talking. My kids don't want to hear someone talk for 20 minutes. They want to see someone jump around and wrestle. So it's interesting, different dynamics and price range.
Well, price range is a big factor. The very fact that I just had this talk because I'm doing a book. This isn't a secret. I'm working on a book now about the history of Busted Open Radio and Pro Wrestling Nation 24/7. And so I was chatting with Sam Roberts, who's one of the hosts of 24/7, and he's also a backstage interviewer who we've seen on WWE. And he was talking about being a kid. I'm older than, with the exception of, say, George Napolitano and Bill Apter, I'm one of the oldest guys there. Sam Roberts was talking about he'd watch wrestling, it'd be on 1 hour a week, and he'd play with his action figures, and he'd, come up with storylines for the action figures, and he'd come up with finishes for the action figures. And then he said a house show would come around. Now the action figures are in your hometown and you're going there with your father. And there's something beautiful about that. And it wasn't expensive. It was, it wasn't unreasonably expensive. And it's sad to see that going away. Again, it's part and parcel of the sports industry now. I also used to be able to go to, New York Mets games with my family. I mean, I used to go down to Miami to see I had family there. My uncle was a baker at the old Beau Rivage Hotel on Collins Avenue, and my grandparents ended up living down there with my aunt and uncle. And we would go to Miami Beach Convention Hall, see, Jack Briscoe and Dusty Rhodes and Harley Race when he passed through. Tim Mr. Wrestling Woods, Paul Jones, Tak Song. I'm remembering all these matches I saw off the top of my head. And it would be myself, my father, my sister, my grandfather, my aunt and uncle, usually like at least two to three cousins. That was a big pack of people going, and we could afford it. And like I said, my father worked in construction. My uncle was a baker, and we were not a family of means. We were a working class family who watched wrestling, and it wasn't off limits to us. In fact, we used to plan vacations. Well, it was vacation for us, and my father would usually help his parents do home repairs. That was his vacation. He'd be up on a ladder the whole time. But we would plan it every Wednesday night. There was wrestling in Miami, Florida Championship Wrestling in Miami Beach Convention Hall. And we would fly out Wednesday morning sometimes. We would then go to the matches Wednesday night. Then we wouldn't fly home until the next Thursday so we could get in 2 weeks of wrestling.
Wow.
So, you think about the cost today,
Mm.
that wouldn't be possible. It's like, okay, well, we're going to like 2 WrestleMania, we're spending $750 2 weeks in a row per person, and then we're going to spend another $1,000 on merch, it's a different world.
It is. I think wrestling fans, at least, anytime I've talked to somebody, it's generational. Your grandfather brings your father, who brings you,
Right.
you bring your
Exactly.
kids. But if you price gouge your generational fans out, obviously you're still creating new fans because like NFL, basketball players, whatever. But do you feel like wrestling fans, the generational part is going to disappear and it's just going to be an entity like a Pepsi or a Coke? It's just a company that everyone
I
knows.
hope not. It's a great question, and it's a thought-provoking question, and it's probably, a conversation that we should continue after we've both thought about it more in the future. But, I would hope not. Look, there's always patterns.
Yeah.
I know nowadays because I talk to fans. Somebody watched it as a kid. They turn it on as a lark, like, hey, I used to love this when I was, my son's age or my daughter's age. Let's see what they think. And the kid takes to it. And there's a couple of years where, the parents and the kids are watching it together. And then sometimes the kids outgrow it, sometimes, they start dating or playing, high school sports and very seriously, or, going to protests. Well, yeah.
Well, it depends what year. Yeah, in this year, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but and so just naturally it fades, and then sometimes those kids come back to it as adults. It's hard to really know because I don't think the prices though will dissuade people from watching. If you're a fan, you're a fan. It's still available. It's on TV. It's on streaming. You can watch highlights.
Yeah.
So, if you were, as we speak, if you were asleep last night or you were out last night, SmackDown was last night. There was a storyline that I'm not going to get into because it'll date this.
Yes, of course.
But you can circle back the next morning and watch the highlights. And if you're really intrigued, you find a little bit of time during the day and you can watch the match. So that's not going. The live experience is changing, and it's concerning. Because it is something that families should enjoy together. And if, like you say, you have 3 kids, and if you go with your kids and someone's not having a great night, maybe somebody has, a sore throat or something, and you're not feeling all this regret, like, oh my God, I spent so much money and we had to leave before the main event because my kid was sick. You say, oh, well, we'll see it again when they come back.
That's just true too, because usually they'd say like, "Well, come back and go buy tickets now because in 2 months we'll be here." And you're like, "Oh my God, we had so much. We gotta go buy tickets now." So yeah, I understand. Like it's a whole different ball game now with professional wrestling. Different eras have different opportunities. But I want to talk about a thing that recently I talked with Sean Mooney on our Golden Era podcast about, and I want your opinion about this. And it's Cyndi Lauper.
By the way, I want to say it's really cool to be participating in a podcast that involves Sean Mooney. And I probably, when he was at WWE, we shook hands a bunch of times. Yeah, I've never had a conversation with him, and he's a guy I've always wanted to meet.
He's so knowledgeable, and anytime we discuss any event, he's reading up on it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, he's definitely a scout. I'm like, oh, we're gonna talk about SummerSlam '88. He's like, all right, and then suddenly he's like, yeah, I read 5 books about it this week. I'm like, you did what about what?
Yeah,
did you find?
right.
You found 5 books about it? Like, what are you talking about? And so yeah, he's very knowledgeable. But I asked him this question recently, and he had some thoughts about it. And I want to know your opinion. It's Cyndi Lauper, and does she not get enough credit for helping the WWF like reach a new level faster than anyone expected, because with Captain Lou inside of our Girls Just Want to Have Fun video, that put eyeballs on Captain Lou even more. And they were like, well, who's this person? It carries over into wrestling. Suddenly you have MTV involved as well. Like, does Cyndi Lauper not get the credit she deserves for helping WWF becoming this juggernaut?
I think she gets the credit.
You think so?
I think so. I mean, Roddy Piper, when he was alive, always, in my conversations with him, would always give her credit. He always said that Cyndi Lauper came in because she was a wrestling fan, just like we are. And her goal was largely, what can I give to wrestling? I like wrestling. It wasn't, what can I take from wrestling? And everybody who was around at the time acknowledges she was the hottest pop star in the country, or one of them. I mean, if Whitney Houston, she may have been around the same period. I mean, Cyndi Lauper was certainly, she was on the cover of all these major magazines around that period. She brought Hulk Hogan to the Grammys.
Yep.
It's unprecedented. Now, John Cena, The Rock, they all go to the Grammys and the Oscars.
Yeah.
It's taken for granted they'll be there. Those are WWE's homegrown celebrities that WWE created. Back in 1985, Vince McMahon had to go out and find celebrities and pay them to show up. Cyndi Lauper, I believe, truly wanted to help the business because she appreciated the business. No. And I don't know why she's not in the Hall of Fame. I've read speculation online, but she certainly belongs there because she did a lot for the industry, and she was universally appreciated backstage.
Great to hear that Roddy Piper had kind words to say about her, because
very kind. Yes.
When I do deep dives on some of these events with Sean Mooney, suddenly I'm rediscovering history sometimes when you forget about it, and you discover, you're like, wait, kind of without her, there is no rock and wrestling era. Then without her, there is no golden era, and then so on and so forth. So
yes,
I wish people would appreciate her more. Like, we did a whole podcast about Sherri Martel, another person I feel like doesn't get this credit. It's like it skips over her somehow and goes to China, which I respect China. But
of course, yeah.
But wrestling fans, sometimes you forget the people who created the foundation to get you here now. But with Cyndi Lauper, I'm glad that people actually had kind words to say about her.
What is gratifying about Sherri Martel is that a number of current female wrestlers have mentioned her to me.
Oh, good.
Which means that they've gone back and doing their own research, and they zoned in on Sherri, and they understand the contribution she made and how, she could hold her own with any guy, and, how she was fearless, and how she, had such a large personality and channeled that personality successfully. And that is a beautiful thing when a young talent acknowledges something before her era.
Now, here's a question for you, since you cover so many different topics in the world. With wrestling, why do you think fans who discover wrestling, say now, go back and want to learn the history, versus if I just started watching football and I'm 5 years old, usually you don't go find the past of sports unless it's a highlighted person like a Michael Jordan. Why do you think wrestling fans go back and, like, for instance, right now we're talking about the past. We're not talking about current events. And wrestling fans seem to love the nostalgia feeling of remembering maybe when they discovered something. But why do you feel like that's the case with fans?
It's so funny because when I started out writing about wrestling, like, wrestling history wasn't really acknowledged. Everything was immediate. It was what was in front of you. You didn't, in the territory days, you didn't acknowledge what went on in the other territories. You didn't acknowledge what, maybe this guy was a good guy in another territory. Maybe this guy held a championship. Maybe this guy was a tag team wrestler. It was almost like he was reinvented when you saw him. I think that it's understood that the eras bleed into each other. That without Cyndi Lauper, you don't have, and rock and wrestling, you don't have The Rock.
Right.
You don't have John Cena as a Hollywood star. There's wrestlers like Roddy Piper. Without Roddy Piper, you don't have MJF. And MJF has told me that he, has studied Roddy Piper. I mean, that's his predecessor.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a rock and roll musician, you study the blues. The blues gave birth to rock and roll.
Yep.
So, I think that that's a very healthy thing. And it shows that in many ways, there's a sophistication when you're a certain type of wrestling fan. You understand nothing lives in a vacuum.
Right. Because you wrote a book about WrestleMania 3, bigger, better, badder. And it's funny because people didn't know before WrestleMania 3 that Andre and Hogan did fight multiple times in different places. Yeah. But when you get to WrestleMania 3, you're told that this is the first time, and this is the first time Andre's ever been body slammed. So when you wrote that book, it's very interesting because WrestleMania 3, again, is another event where I feel like without this, you don't have the future. For you, why did you choose to write that book?
Well, again, the WrestleMania that was in LA. I'm in the Rainbow, which is a well-known rock and roll haunt on Sunset Boulevard. And a lot of wrestlers have always hung out there. On that particular night, I know I was talking to Frankie Kazarian and, Bully Ray was there, and Wolfgang, who was in Gallus, was in there. Joey Janela was in there. Nick Nemeth or Dolph Ziggler was in there. So it was quite a scene. Yeah. Another time I was there, and Sabu was there. So wrestlers would definitely pop into the place. And I'm in a conversation about what WrestleMania week means. That it's not just, as we know, fans don't just go to see WrestleMania. Sometimes fans go and they don't attend any WWE events. They attend, game changer wrestling events, and they attend Tokyo Yoshi events. Yeah. And, if, Rev Pro from the UK has a contingent over, they'll attend that. And there's lucha events. And so it's basically a wrestling festival for a week. And of course, there's WrestleCon. And, I was arguing that without WrestleMania 3, this week would not exist. Wrestling tourism exists. And as I'm discussing it, somehow in my head, I'm thinking, maybe I should write a book about this. And I'm talking to a female indie wrestler, and I mentioned that to her, and she goes, you should definitely write that. You should definitely do it. Otherwise, you're going to regret it if you don't do it. And I think on Monday morning, I called Michael Holmes, the executive editor for ECW Press in Toronto. He goes, I think that's a pretty good idea. Why don't you write up a proposal? And there we go.
Wow. It's one of those events that, so why do you think it's so important to the history of professional wrestling, not just the WWE, but you bring in wrestling every week?
First of all, wrestling is all related to each other. AEW and WWE are related to each other. What goes on the indies impacts WWE. Look, remember, Jacob Fatu spent most of his career in the indies. And, he's a major player in WWE now. Zilla Fatu, I don't know where he wrestled MJF recently at a House of Glory show in Queens, in New York. So, everyone's aware of what goes on elsewhere. It's not like you have WWE and everything else is over here. WrestleMania, I think WrestleMania 1 and 2 were part of the wrestling fad. Wrestling was in. I don't think a lot of people thought it was going to remain a thing. I believe the popular assumption was then fans would, the pop culture would shift and people would be into something else. And WrestleMania 3 changed it because an NFL stadium sold out. And, suddenly people traveled to WrestleMania. Prior to that, you had, WrestleMania 2 was 3 locations. They
Right.
were obviously trying to compete with Jim Crockett, who did Starrcade in 2 locations in Greensboro and Atlanta. So this was New York, Chicago, LA. But it was, those were fans from Southern California went to the LA show. Fans from, the Midwest went to the Chicago show. WrestleMania 3 was in Pontiac, Michigan. Fans came down from Canada. Fans drove over from, they drove over from Illinois. They drove over from Wisconsin. You certainly, for the book, I interviewed several people who flew over from New York. And there was the beginning of wrestling tourism, and sponsors and licensees and media conglomerates noticed that. And, whether people liked wrestling or they still condescended towards wrestling, they couldn't deny wrestling.
Right.
And it changed wrestling, and it forced the world to take it more seriously, even if they still rolled their eyes and acted haughty when the topic came up.
Oh yeah, because fans, obviously are a big part of professional wrestling. It's a give and take with fans and wrestlers. But you also wrote a book about wrestling during COVID. And
yes, I did.
My God, it was supposed to come to me today. Amazon decided to be an ass, and I didn't get it, so I didn't get to read it right away. But I cannot wait because the COVID-19 era of professional wrestling is so different from other sports because other sports completely shut down. I used to work for a news station, and I remember the night they said NBA this season is canceled, and people, oh my God! But then Raw, SmackDown, NXT, PLEs, they kept moving forward.
And
AEW, same thing. TNA, same thing. Like, why do you feel like wrestling somehow kept pushing forward and didn't let it affect them versus but not real sports like NBA, NFL? We're like, we have no idea what to do.
That's that again. These are really good questions. I don't know how qualified I am to answer these, but I would imagine. First of all, let me name the book. The book is called "Follow the Buzzards: Pro Wrestling in the Age of COVID-19," also by ECW Press. I would think that pro wrestling, there were TV contracts in place. Nobody wanted to lose all that revenue that you get from TV contracts. And pro wrestling has always been escapism. And there was an effort made to help people escape from the fears that existed during that period. We didn't have the vaccine yet, although some people, have their theories about the vaccines, that they were part of some dark and sinister plot like a wrestling storyline. But we didn't have the vaccines. People were getting sick. I had a friend who's he was in the hospital for a while, and he was on a respirator, so it was scary. And wrestling helped you feel a little bit better. It was exciting. You're stuck at home anyway, and there it was. And wrestling is corny, so maybe you don't have to follow all the rules of the NBA and the NFL. You could, the WWE and AEW, they certainly made efforts to keep people safe, but maybe it wasn't as strict, so they could. I remember hearing with WWE, I think it's in the book, they would bring people down to the performance center and they would shuttle them over in shifts, so you never had like the entire backstage there at the same time. So it's okay, we need these 10 people, let's bring them over, and the other 10 will leave. Everything was pre-taped. I mean, WrestleMania was pre-taped. And again, that changed the industry too, because you had 2 nights of WrestleMania, and that remained. And now we have, you know, 2 nights of SummerSlam.
Yeah.
And, you know, so there were other things that I thought were, you know, in the moment, and I, you know, this is in the book. I thought, you know, the Thunderdome, the big LED screens
Yes.
around the ring. You know, we forget that it's not that long ago.
No.
And that compensated for fans not being there. And I thought, oh, this is so great. Like, this is so cool. Like, this will probably continue to exist after, you know, COVID. And then, of course, there were live fans. And it's like, well, we don't really need that anymore. And, you know, so, you know, the cinematic match, sure, there'll be cinematic matches again, but they were crucial during the time of COVID. But wrestling, you know, it's corny, it's marginal. People know how to survive. People are scratching for every scrap. Business might be booming, but wrestling remembers what it came from. And maybe that's why wrestling continued to exist. And I do think there is a dedication to the fans. And nobody wanted to disappoint the fans. And the fans wanted wrestling.
I'm so happy you brought up the Thunderdome as well, because I was in the Thunderdome a couple times.
You were?
Yes, you put it, so it was like a website, and you would go on, and it would suddenly get a notification, 3 p.m. You have to go on this website, and you put in your information, and you hope you get picked. And out of nowhere, like 2 hours later, you get another message, hey, you're going to be in it. But if I don't think people understand, when you're in the Thunderdome, you would be watching a match and suddenly they say, okay, here comes Randy Orton. You'd hear a voice out of nowhere on the computer. All right, here comes Randy Orton. Everyone boo. And so, or like cheer. So that you'd be like, yeah, yeah. And throughout the night, you would see later on, I wasn't in the Thunderdome for an event, and out of nowhere, I see myself in the Thunderdome. I'm like, huh? So they're recording us the entire time, using our reactions for later on in different events to make sure the audience at home knows, hey, everyone's having fun. Everyone's cheering or booing these people. It was bizarre. It
is really bizarre. So you're cheering for things you don't see. And from what you're telling me, and then they insert you onto another show. Perhaps.
Yes. Yes. I'm guessing it's in the bottom of the, you know, do you agree to these terms and conditions? I'm guessing it said somewhere, we can use your recording anytime we want, any which way we want. So it's funny because I've known people who are like in the Thunderdome during a big event. Someone wins a world title, and there they are cheering and going crazy. And then they would post on Twitter like, I didn't. That's from like weeks ago. I don't know what they're doing. Like a little propaganda, you know, a little teasing there.
Well,
but
keep the people happy. Again, no one ever said that that's not professional wrestling. You know, professional wrestling's a magic show, so it's all part of the illusion.
Yes, it was certainly that. But there was the first couple of nights, nobody was policing those Thunderdome monitors.
I remember. That's in
there
the
was.
book.
Oh yeah, there was some weird stuff. Like
Yes,
what are you doing?
That's all in the book.
Okay, good.
Not mention certain things.
Yes, of course.
People did some distasteful things.
Yes, and then suddenly someone was policing it and realized, oh, you can't just blindly let people into a camera behind you
when they're bored at home and they may have antisocial tendencies to begin with.
Yeah. And why do you think Florida was the place? I know AEW because of their ownership of an arena, but for WWE, why do you think Florida?
Well, they already did have the Performance Center there. And, you know, quite fortunately for all parties involved, Florida was a red state, and they thought COVID restrictions were unnecessary. And so it was good for wrestling. And I don't know. I guess everybody's healthy now, so I guess it was good for everybody. If it's good for wrestling, it's good for the world sometimes.
See, I'm glad you said that, because I remember all that happening. Suddenly there was money given to Florida governors and senators and things like that through different organizations. And suddenly we had liquor stores, marijuana stores, and professional wrestling as necessary things during COVID. And it was like, oh, I'm sorry, why are you necessary? But hey, I enjoyed it. I remember WrestleMania night, both nights, sitting in my house, everyone's afraid, and watching professional wrestling. So
it was great. I remember being on what was it? It wasn't Zoom. it was House Party was the
Oh
name
my,
of it.
yeah.
And being on House Party with at least a dozen friends watching WrestleMania the
Wow.
first night. And that one guy I told you about who just got out of the hospital was talking about it, and he was saying, well, they're saying that if you've had COVID once, you can never get it again. So, which now we know isn't
Yeah, I was
true.
gonna say I got it 3 times.
Everything's speculated, and speculative. And he's like, maybe I'm going from the weakest to the strongest. Who knows? So we're talking about COVID. We're talking about wrestling. Everyone's having a great time. Everybody was drinking to excess too.
Oh my God. Liquor stores were like, we're profiting. Everyone's home
Right?
drinking. Yeah, it was a weird moment, but again,
Yes,
you've covered so many different things in wrestling, but what is a wrestling moment that you think gets talked about constantly, but maybe doesn't actually deserve that much attention?
no, that's a hard one. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I try to emphasize the positives of professional
Okay.
wrestling.
So
So I don't dwell a lot on negative things involving wrestling.
mhm.
So I don't really think about, oh, this is talked about too much. If people are talking about it and it's good for wrestling, I think that's a positive.
Okay.
So yeah, so I'm not sure about that.
So then what's a moment that you think doesn't get talked about enough?
Well, there's certainly stuff from the territorial days. I mean, have you had Brian Solomon on your show? Who
No,
wrote
not yet.
the
He's
Gorilla
I
Monsoon?
got a list of the hits I need, and he's one of them.
Yeah, because he wrote a book about the original Sheik. That's a beautiful book. I mean, so's the Gorilla Monsoon book. And he's a friend of mine. He
Hmm.
worked for WWF Magazine with me. It's funny because he was younger than me. He was like 15 years younger than me or so. So he was like a kid, and I was like the seasoned veteran. And now we're peers and we help each other out. We fact check each other's books, and but his detail what in that Sheik book about the territory days and the wars that went on in single regions like Detroit. There was a war between the Sheik and Dick the Bruiser over Detroit. Dick the Bruiser and the Sheik had been partners, and now they were part of a territory that was Michigan and Indiana. And now Dick the Bruiser had Indianapolis, and the Sheik had Detroit and the surrounding cities in Michigan. And now they go to war over Detroit or Michigan. And yeah, that's to me that's fascinating. That these promoters just fighting for a territory with limited with a limited audience. And the same thing happened in Montreal or Quebec with the Rougeaus and the Vachons. Each had their own promotions, and they did stadium shows. That were like at the height of those wars. Like everybody seemed to be doing well, and then you kind of diluted the audience, and that was, I think it in the end, it hurt both promotions. And so I feel that type of history, if you're going to deep dive on history, it would be nice. Well, in my mind, I mean, it's not crucial to the advancement of society, but, it would be nice to consider there was a time before you had monoliths like WWE and even AEW, which has deep resources. And, the Khan family owns the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Fulham Football Club. There were times when things were done a lot grittier, a lot cheaper, and regional. And, if you lived in Quebec during the early 70s, that wrestling war was a pretty big deal between those two promotions. And for a period, you were a beneficiary of that because all this great talent was coming in because the promoters were competing, and then it would flame out. I mean, I can remember the IWA around 1975 attempted to become a national promotion.
Mm.
And they couldn't get into Madison Square Garden, but they could get into, there was a baseball stadium in Jersey City, right over the Hudson River, and the Brooklyn Dodgers played a few games there a year, and the WWF had promoted some shows there. And, Bill Apter will talk about photographing Mil Mascaras against, I believe it was Ivan Koloff, the former WWF champion, them wrestling in the rain, and Bill Apter's there taking photos of it. And, the idea was they were going to go national. They were going to hurt the WWF. They were going to hurt, Jim Crockett Promotions. Crockett and Crockett Sr., McMahon Sr. were allies at that point, So, at one point, Crockett Sr. in the early 60s, around the time of the New York World's Fair, came into New York and had TV from Sunnyside Gardens in Queens and was trying to do a renegade promotion with Antonino Rocca as their main star. So those wrestling wars in territories, that's a fascinating, phenomenon to me. And, I could talk about it forever, but I do think that younger modern fans, I know they find it interesting because when I've written about it, I've received comments from younger people about it. And I do think that, younger wrestling fans, many of them are curious and they care about the history. And, they are intrigued by what it was like to live in the territory days. And one more thing, now that I
got your brain going. I love it.
This is mentioned very briefly in my WrestleMania 3 book because I talk about what existed before. I talk a lot about the territories because I felt I needed to explain what was lost as we had national expansion. And I talk about what was going on in Europe, in particular the UK at that point. And there was a promoter in the UK named Orig Williams, and I've watched the show. It's on YouTube. He did a Welsh language wrestling promotion. And, I mean, if anyone would buy the book, I would write a whole book about that, but nobody seems interested except me.
Well, I love the history of professional wrestling, so I would be interested in checking that out. There's a great NWA book about how pretty much it's a mafia situation where everyone's we're working together, but like, are we really working together?
Is that the Hornbaker book?
Oh, maybe. I've read it so long ago.
I have it.
Yeah, that's one of those books where I remember that was my first time, because my first ever wrestling book, at least for me, was Mick Foley's book in 1989,
which is the best of all of them.
It started off this whole everyone needs a book now. And that was a book I actually read, and I was oh my god, page to page, talking about his ear falling off from the first line of the book. I'm in.
What? I've read that book twice, and I just read an interview with Mick Foley, and I'm like, I think I'm ready to read that book a third time.
Oh, it's what's funny is I bought another copy of it just because I had the hard copy years ago, and then you move around and things like that, and you lose shit like that, and it sucks. But that book's one of the greatest books I've ever read as a child because it made me want to read. When you're in school, you're forced to read. I was very happy to finally get a book, then so on and so forth. But before we wrap this up, though, there's, as always, and still to this day, this conversation of the eras and what's the greatest, and people who in today's world we're making more money than ever, and someone will say, yeah, but the Attitude Era. For you, how is that argument still lasting today? Isn't it a wrestling business where we make most money, or is it we're in the pulp culture eye like the Attitude Era, so everyone knows what we're doing?
I think the best. I know this because I raised 2 children, and they certainly watched a lot of wrestling, like your kids do. The best wrestling is the wrestling you watch when you're 11 years old. you go the rest of your life and you think that is the golden age of professional wrestling.
Wow. So I would say, I guess Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart and the
And
new
which was
generation.
pretty great, by the way.
The new generation, I guess, would be for me.
Which
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
Which was great.
People crap on Duke the Dumpster Drozy and Henry O. Godwin gimmicks. I'm
Yeah,
like,
but
I'm
we're
all
still
in. Like
talking
Bastion
about
Booger.
it.
Give me some Bastion Booger, damn it.
Sebastian Booger, the Goon. I mean, we're still talking about all those names.
Right. And there's plenty of names that existed when business was doing better. And you're like, I don't remember that person. Or where is that person?
And sometimes the worst angles, the worst characters are things that have staying power because it was so bad, it was good. You know, there was a wrestler. So I, as a kid would go back into history and get older wrestling magazines that predated my fandom. And I had a wrestling magazine, I would say, from the mid 60s. And, the Beatles were very popular. And there was a guy, and I just wrote about him recently in Inside the Ropes magazine in the UK, because I'm a columnist for them. George Ringo, the wrestling beat. He was a jobber. And, I remember there was one match where, Dick the Bruiser had to get a tag team partner. So he picked the worst wrestler in the world, and that was George Ringo, the wrestling beat. And so, all that stuff is really cool. But I have to check out of my hotel.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for your time here, Keith. I really appreciate you sharing the past, the present, and the future with your knowledge. I'm Steve Fall. He's Keith Elliot Greenberg. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, this a fall count, clap in time. Steve Fall, live on the front.